an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Talents, chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, Olamina, as I shall now call her, she discovers that her brother, Marcus, whom she had long thought dead, is actually still alive. But he has been through hell, and it doesn't feel that he is recovering very well. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Danique for commissioning these episodes. I am really excited because today is the first day of coverage of the portion of the book I had not gotten to read yet. So we are starting some new stuff, and it is really startling. I had long suspected that maybe somebody would pop up that she had thought was dead, but her brothers weren't the ones. I kind of thought maybe her father would, because he is, an unknown quantity. He wound up just leaving for work, or he left from work to come home, I believe is how it went, and disappeared along the way. And I still wonder sometimes, because it's such a rare thing in a purposefully written book series for someone to disappear that way and not return at all. I enjoy the fact that he has not returned. I am kind of a fan of the uncertainty of that, because that feels extremely real to the time that she's living in. But if he did come back, I wouldn't really be mad about it. Depending on how it's done, it could be brilliant. I will confess that I have a little bit of concern about the fact that since her father was a Baptist preacher, that maybe if something happened to him a certain way, he could wind up being part of the enemy that she is fighting against with Jarrett. I don't really her father didn't seem to have that kind of mentality. So it's not like if a young kid disappeared and he could be radicalized. I feel like that can be harder to do once you've reached a certain age, but it's not impossible. And who knows? We'll see. So, all right, let's start off. Chapter 6 begins with the God is change. It's another verse. And then we have the entry from her daughter. It's a good thing, I suppose, that my mother's God was change. Her life had a way of changing in abrupt, important ways. I don't suppose she was really any more prepared for sudden changes than anyone else, but her beliefs helped her cope with them, even take advantage of them when they came. Which... it's a weird thing to me that her daughter is writing this way. I suppose it's lucky. And I'm like, it's not luck. I feel like that was the entire point of her deciding that this was who her God was going to be, is to cope with the inevitable upheavals, because she lives during a time of unceasing, dramatic change. Change is always happening, but there are certain times, periods of history through which it happens much more quickly and much more dramatically and much more suddenly, and you feel it more. And that is part of what makes it strange in a lot of ways to be a millennial, is that we often, as children, we know what it was before technology, like the present technology we are all so used to, even existed or was a concept that we thought of. And we got to watch as it was born and turned into this ubiquitous thing that it now is. And it can make you feel really old sometimes, because the change has been so drastic. Using cassette tapes to tape off of the radio was something that I did as a teenager. I wasn't even a little kid. I was in high school. And knowing that now that will never really be something that anybody has to do ever again is just strange, And I feel like this last century, especially because of technological advances, is probably the most accelerated in change that we have ever seen as a race. So I don't know. I thought it was strange because it really is a piece of evidence, I think, that Olamina's daughter does not understand Olamina at all. And I find that to be a little bit sad, you know? I mean, I've been kind of reserving judgment on her view of her mother and the way that things have gone down, because she's been pretty hard on Olamina and seems to feel that Olamina made some really bad choices. And I am still reserving judgment on that front because she may prove to be really right. But this is a bit in the column for maybe she just doesn't see her mother clearly. Because if she doesn't understand something this basic, I don't really know what she thinks was going on with Earthseed, you know? So there's this moment where she says she couldn't know that she was in for other major changes even before she could get used to being pregnant. So we know this is all going to happen really shortly. So then we get a journal entry from Olamina, and she's talking about spokesmen for Christian America have announced that the church will be opening homeless shelters and children's homes, orphanages in several states, including California, Oregon, and Washington. And this is one of those things that, because of the world that she lives in, I'm a little surprised that she takes this as good news, because I am highly suspicious of this. They have already privatized prisons in this world, and they have, I mean, let's be honest, for-profit prisons exist already. So prisons have been privatized, but police overall have been privatized in this world. And the fact that it hasn't seemed to have occurred to anybody that these homeless shelters or these orphanages could double as workhouses is surprising, because that's not like a new concept. That is definitely something that has been extant for centuries. You get housing in exchange for labor, and the labor is unpaid because you should be grateful that since you have no qualifications and you have nobody to stand up and defend you, no recourse of any kind, you should be grateful that you have somewhere to sleep and food, and usually barely enough food. But we'll see. She says, I don't want them up here. Christian America is made up of scary people, and I find it impossible to believe that they intend only to do good and help others. Now, that is just like, I agree, but that's not the kind of fear that I was expecting from her. She seems a lot more afraid of the front of it being a Christian thing. I am more afraid of it being an institutionalized thing that is run by the government. But 6 of one, half dozen of the other in this world, right? They're basically the same thing, the same concerns. So then we go to December 17th. She found her brother Marcus. I found him in Eureka, California, although 5 years ago down in Robledo, he died. I don't know what to say about this. I don't know how to deal with it. Writing about it helps. Somehow writing always helps. So we have this setup here where Bankole is going to go and help this community where first of all, there's a couple of communities. The first one is that he just needs to, do the traveling doctor thing. But it's a curious interaction between him and Olamina, because he tells her to stay home and stay safe. And she kind of challenges him because he has asserted that Acorn is not safe. And she kind of feels like this is him finally admitting something that he hasn't wanted to admit. But he is not ready to say that. He just says that it's safer than traveling. Dan Neuer would also be along because our special errand concerned him. On our way home, we were going to meet with a man who had contacted us through friends in Georgetown. And it's a fucking, they call him a livestock man specializing in lamb and chicken. He's a pimp. And he pimps out children. And this is something that, it is unsurprising. Olamina very nearly loses her cool when she has to interact with this guy. She keeps it. And she honestly keeps it better than I thought. I wondered if she was going to let some of her contempt for this guy sort of leak out. But she doesn't. She plays it really cool. And it's the sort of thing that a lot of us can fantasize about, breaking this guy's head open and stealing all these kids away. But once you find out from Marcus exactly how these collars work that they are all wearing, it becomes clear that that would have killed all of them, more than likely. And in a really slow, horrible way. So, yeah, thank God she didn't do that. So yeah, he goes off, but then she goes on this other mission, Bankole doesn't go off by himself. That's later. Bankole comes with them on this mission. They go and deliver their fruits to a couple of different farms. They stop by Dovetree to pick them because Dovetree still has a lot of fruit trees left. But obviously that's where that other family was attacked. Nobody lives there anymore. They just go and take advantage of the fact that the gardens and orchards are still doing something. And then we head over to this place. First they go, Bankole buys supplies. And there's this moment where she is talking about how ignorance and poverty has caused a lot of diseases to come back. And in the age of anti-vaxxers, I don't know when this book was written how relevant this was yet. I know that in theory, this is something that a lot of people have posited can happen, but I don't know how much this had been an issue yet. But I mean, it is purely ignorance. And don't get me wrong, I don't trust the pharmaceutical industry. I don't trust big pharma. I mean, I feel like that is at the base of the fuck up of our country's healthcare system. But I do not believe that vaccinations are a part of a conspiracy here. I really do not. And if the conspiracy is only that kids wind up with autism, I would rather that than they die. Call me crazy. But this is just something that I found like kind of arresting as I was reading it. And rabies especially has been a breakout because people are living out amongst animals. And, you know, it's the kind of thing that can kill you really quickly. Rabies is kind of terrifying if you ever like look into it. So they go to meet this pimp at Georgetown. And it's an interesting like area because it's super dangerous in a lot of ways. Lots of crime, lots of disease, open sewers. Like there's, you know, not electricity. There's not plumbing. The settlement is called Georgetown because the most permanent looking thing in it is a cluster of shabby looking redwood buildings. They're on a flattened hilltop and can be seen from just about everywhere in the settlement. There's a store, a cafe, a games hall, bar, a hotel, fuel station, and a repair shop where tools, guns, and vehicles of all kinds might be restored to usefulness. The whole complex is called George's and is run by a huge family surnamed George. At the cafe, George's has a lot of rentable cubbyhole mailboxes where packages and paper messages can be left, and there's a big bank of payphones where, for a serious fee, you can access almost any network, service, group, or individual. This service in particular has made the place a combination message center, meeting place, and Old West saloon. It's natural to arrange to meet people there to transact business of all kinds. Elroy George and his sons-in-law, his brothers, and his brothers' sons see to it that people behave themselves. The Georges are a formidable tribe. They stick together, and people respect them. Their prices are high, but they're honest. You get what you pay for with the Georges. Sad to say, some of the things that get paid for in the cafe or elsewhere at the complex are slaves and drugs. The Georges aren't slavers, but they've been known to handle drugs. I wish that weren't so, but it is. I just hope they don't go the way of the Dovetrees. They're stronger and more entrenched and better connected politically than the Dovetrees, but who knows? Now that Jarrett has been elected, who knows? So I find this really interesting because it feels like the Georges are kind of what I think Olamina wants to be. And that's not to say, like, obviously they are not a religious movement. And they do not have any sort of like spiritual backing to what they do. They are providing services that are necessary and they have excellent security. But it is that they are sort of like the castle on the hill that Bankole was talking about. And I can't help but wonder if this is going to lead to eventually like a closer relationship between them and Olamina as she begins to sort of explore the infrastructure behind the way they have things set up. And just how they manage to keep it all safe, you know? So she talks about Dolores, who is the matriarch, and that, she has the reputation for being kind of a mean, tough woman, but Olamina really likes her and kind of just sees her as somebody who is real with you and says exactly what she thinks and doesn't really edit anything. And when she tells her that they've been looking for these 2 girls, and this is a while back, Dolores is just kind of like, yeah, okay, there's no way we're going to see them ever again, but I'll put it around. And it winds up sort of coming back to, like, her information winds up being of use, even though it's not correct, because what draws them out here is that they have been told Dan's sister has been found, one of his sisters. And according to a description of her, once they see the girl that everyone thought was probably his sister, it makes a ton of sense why people thought they had the right girl. She has a couple of specific, like, scars and beauty marks that are the same as what he was describing. So it's turns out to not be who he was looking for, but she does look like his sister. And I like the fact that we get evidence that this information isn't being corrupted, or there isn't just some sort of, like, play to act like we're being useful when really we're not. I really like the fact that we get to see some evidence of the community at large working together to try and help find somebody. This is the first time I think we've really seen that and watched an interaction with somebody from a faraway community, with our people. And, it's nice to see that it doesn't always wind up in fucking bloodshed. So we go and see her, and it turns out, like I said, that this is not the right girl. The guy who is the pimp is such an interesting description. I didn't like his dry, papery voice or his tan, almost yellow eyes. He used them to try and stare me down. Even his smell repelled me. He wore some aftershave or cologne that gave him a heavy, nasty, sweet scent. Honest sweat would have been less offensive. He was bald, clean-shaved, beak-nosed, and so neutral-colored that he could have been a pale-skinned black man, a Latino, or a dark-skinned white. He wore, aside from his black pants and shirt, an impressive pair of black leather boots, no expense spared, and a wide, heavy leather belt decorated with what I first thought were jewels. It took me a moment to realize this was a control belt, the kind you use when you're moving around a lot and controlling several people through slave collars. I had never seen one before, but I'd heard descriptions of them. So, first of all, I love that she talks about his tan, almost yellow eyes. Like, that is really disconcerting. And the matter-of-factness of describing the fact that he is one of the people using the collars that we just read about last section, which so horrified me as to very nearly give me nightmares, just the concept of this. It is pretty devastating. And they go out to look at the kids, and Olamina is sort of surprised because she expected them to be presented in a lascivious manner, dressed up in revealing clothing, maybe wearing makeup to make them look older, and instead they just look like ordinary kids. Maybe their clothes, maybe the skirts are a little shorter and the jeans are a little bit tighter, but really they do not look like they are being, like, presented for sale. There isn't really a pitch. It's just, these are kids. That's it. And the slaves were clean and they looked alert and wary. None of them looked sick or beaten, but they all kept an eye on Cougar. And we wind up finding out later that her brother Marcus is actually, he has like 3 different kinds of venereal diseases. So whether they look sick or not, likely they all are. And Bencole says that if Marcus hadn't gotten treatment, he would have died eventually from these. So, if these kids don't get treatment, and there's no reason to think they will, likely that's their fate. And it seems like most of them would welcome that based on the way that Marcus talks about this. Somewhere behind me, Dan was whimpering. No, she's still not here. Why did you say she was here? She's not. He sounded much younger than his 15 years. And meanwhile, Olamina has spotted this one boy. And she is like kind of not even hearing Dan's breakdown behind her and zeroes in on this kid. And Cougar, which is what the fucking pimp calls himself, sees her zeroing in on this kid and is like, oh, what? You like that one? Maybe you should take that one. She asks whether the girl that they thought was Nina said she was. And he tells her, can't talk, he said. Can't write either. Best kind of female. She must have said something bad to somebody, though, back when she could talk, because before I bought her, someone cut her tongue off. I didn't let myself react, but there was no way I could avoid thinking of our May back at Acorn. We still don't know whose work this tongue cutting is, but we know that some Christian American types would be happy to silence all women. And she's sort of like, at first, maybe Cougar's lying. Maybe he's the one who did it. But she can tell from his attitude of just not giving a shit that if he did it, he wouldn't lie about it. He wouldn't pretend that it had already happened. He just doesn't care. So finally, she barters with Cougar to get Marcus. And nobody there knows that he is her brother. So everybody's being... I actually have to admit that I was kind of impressed with the way everybody kept it cool, because I kind of thought they might blow it by like talking to her and being like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? And then she would have to blow it by either she would never actually say it was her brother, because then Cougar would just bump the price way up. He would know she was desperate and would do what she could to get him. But there could have been something else that would be a giveaway to Cougar that she was desperate. And thankfully, everybody lets her handle it and nobody steps in and argues with her or tries to stop her. And I have to say, like, in terms of group dynamic, that impresses me so much. And this is the kind of shit that I feel a lot of people, when writing a scene like this, would have fallen back on. They would have had the other parts of her community, the other people they're representing, they would have had them protest or, you know, be like, show that they were unhappy with this. And they would have fallen back on like the human angle of like working in a group. And I think that would be a mistake, because honestly, part of the human angle of working in a group does eventually become, when in doubt, trust the person in charge. And I think a lot of stories, and inevitably The Walking Dead comes to mind, fall back on petty arguing and infighting when they don't really know what else to do, rather than acknowledging that people will adapt when they are in groups in order to stay alive. And if they recognize that not showing doubt or dissension in front of what's pretty much an enemy, Cougar's basically an enemy, if they know that showing that in front of this person would be a display of weakness, they will not do it. Whether or not they privately have their doubts about what is happening, they will be careful about showing that. And there would be no reason to get in her face right now. They could do this later and talk to her. But at the moment, they trust her enough because they know her well and she's the one in charge, really. They know that she wouldn't do this for no reason. So I have to say, this scene made a big impression on me because in a lot of ways, it demonstrates to me how much power and trust Olamina has with her people, that they let her negotiate with this pimp and slaver for a person that was not the agreed upon target. And she's going to be spending currency on this kid. You know, this is money that they have budgeted. And she is choosing to do something without consulting anybody at the last moment that's very different than what they had thought they'd agreed upon. And yet nobody is saying a word about it. They are letting her carry on with it. And that requires a lot of respect and trust. So I'm impressed with it. I really, really like this. And eventually she starts, as she's in the middle of this haggling thing, she realizes that first of all, Cougar is lying about her brother's age. She knows that he's like closer to 20. And then she gets the sense that for some reason, despite the fact that her brother is one of the most attractive people she has ever seen, and apparently a lot of people have ever seen, despite that, Cougar, for some reason, does seem to want to get rid of him. And we find out later that her brother has a lot of horrific scarring all over his body because of being thrown into that house fire. So he isn't like, his face is beautiful, but his body, which is what's really being sold, isn't necessarily going to win him any, like he will probably have to lower the price for Marcus if people like have a problem with the fact that he is covered in burns and scars. My people were the confused, angry ones. Dan in particular looked first disbelieving, then disgusted, then furious, but he followed the example of the two men. He kept quiet. So yeah, this is just, I mean, that requires a lot. And Dan is the one who came here expecting to find his own sister. So him being able to keep it cool. I mean, granted, it doesn't continue on that way. He does not keep cool. He winds up running off on his own. But in this moment, this is what matters. So eventually she takes him back, and it's this like really strange, sad moment of Marcus not really believing that this has happened, that he is like freed of this. The pimp offers for an upsell to give her, to sell her the collar and control unit for it. Which of course she does not take. But yeah, I can understand. It seems like this has been his life for years at this point. Why it would be something that you don't want to let yourself believe and then get disappointed that you are now free. So she gives him a hug once they're inside the truck, and he doesn't really hug her back initially. But then he finally does, and then like curls up in the fetal position. And he says later that when he first saw her, because she sees him look at her and then look really quickly away. And at first she thinks that that's him trying to like warn her not to indicate that he knows her. But he tells her later that when he saw her, he believed that he was hallucinating. And he assumed, as she did this whole time, that she was dead. And upon spotting her, believes that now he has like finally snapped and lost his mind. But, you know, then he realizes that he's really here. And the next morning she like feeds him some of his favorite foods that he used to love when they lived together, which are kind of odd. One of them is like this acorn bread that's got a lot of fruit in it, which that makes sense to me because that's all they had at the time. But the breakfast drink that he liked the best was hot apple juice with a lemon squeezed in it, which that feels familiar. I feel like we might have read that in the last book, but it is just such an odd thing. I mean, I guess it makes sense that, you know, that it would be something really simple. But when I think simple, the combination of apple and lemon would not occur to me. So yeah, she has Bankole examine him and start him on treatments that will get rid of the diseases that he's dealing with, the infections. And she says, I worried that Marcus, in his present state of mind, might get up in the night and run away. How long must he have dreamed of running away from Cougar and his friends? Now, waking up in a strange place and not quite remembering how he had gotten there, just to be sure, even after he had taken his sleeping pill, I went out and told our night watch to be careful. I told them Marcus might awake confused and try to run away, and that they should be careful about shooting at a lone figure trying to get away from Acorn. Under normal circumstances, such a figure would be thought a thief and might be shot. We'd had great trouble with thieves during our first year, and we learned that if we were to survive, we couldn't afford to have much sympathy for them. But Marcus must not be shot. And that is what results in Dan managing to get away, because they think that it's Marcus, and it turns out it was a whole other person that they should have been keeping an eye on. But Olamina admits that, like, I was just so wrapped up in having found my brother, there was no room for me to even pay attention to this kid who had been depending on us to find his sisters. And he seems to, I think what happens is that Dan interprets the fact that Olamina's attention is all directed towards Marcus. I think he interprets that as Olamina having completely forgotten about her promise to him, which is not fair. That's not true. There is simply not much more that she can do other than wait for somebody from the outside to get back to them saying that they have seen her. Other than that, what can she do? But he is a kid and impatient and believes that he can just somehow like go out into the world totally alone and track them down himself, which it makes no sense to me. And I know that this is a young kid, that he's only 15, and that he's headstrong and like I said, impatient. But I just can't imagine growing up in the environment that they all have and it not making such an impression on you that you become even more cautious than otherwise. I mean, his entire family almost is murdered and stolen while they're together in an armored truck, and he thinks he can go out there alone with no weapons that we know of and just somehow handle this all himself? Kid, why do you think that would even be possible? But here we are. So there's a moment where she's talking to Marcus, and she kind of like pushes him a little bit to like maybe write down what happened to him. And it's very clear right away that maybe she's pushing him a little too fast and too hard. But eventually she sits down with him and talks to him, and he tells her everything. He admits everything. We get a journal entry from him, which I never expected. And that's actually pretty cool. We're getting another POV here. And he is a very frustrating person from the outside when we see him talking to Olamina a little bit later. So I'm kind of glad that maybe we'll be able to get a look at the way things are going in his mind so that it will give me more sympathy for him and cause me to be less just outright irritated, because at the moment, that's what I'm feeling. I'm really annoyed, but we'll get there. So then we get her daughter again chiming in. She says, "My Uncle Marc was the handsomest man I've ever seen. I think I fell more than half in love with him before I even met him. There were also times when I was afraid for him." And the fact that she says, "I fell more than half in love with him before I even met him," that makes me question how the fuck things go. Because that implies that she has seen him before she meets him. Which means that either she's seen a photo and they don't have any. So that they wind up somewhere that they can take photos. Or that he was like on TV or something. And that she doesn't wind up meeting him until later in life. So he's not part of the community. So I don't know what that means, but it's telling. There were also times when I was afraid for him. I don't know what to make of our family. My grandfather was, from what I've heard, a good and dedicated Baptist minister. He looked after his family and his community and insisted that both be armed and able to defend themselves in an armed and dangerous world. But beyond that, he had no ambitions. It never seemed to occur to him that he could or should fix the world. Yet he was the father of 2 would-be world fixers. How did that happen? Now again, she's calling Marcus a world fixer. But obviously he's coming at this from a very different direction. So what happens? So we go on. She tried to adapt and grow. Perhaps she feared being like her own mother, who looked for help in a smart drug and wound up damaging her child and killing herself. And she talks about how her mother clings to the concept of purpose and shaping God and turning chaos into something that is directed. And so, because of that, she sort of sees chaos as an opportunity and as a positive that you can form some, you can bend it to create something that is not chaos. But Marc is in the opposite camp, where to him, chaos, she says, it wasn't one of the faces of his God. It was unnatural. It was demonic. He hated what it had done to him, and he needed to prove that he was not what it had forced him to become. No Christian minister could ever hate sin as much as Marc hated chaos. His gods were order, stability, safety, control. He was a man with a wound that would not heal until he could be certain that what happened to him could not happen again to anyone ever. My father called my mother a zealot. I think that name applies even more to Uncle Marc. And yet I think Uncle Marc was more of a realist. Uncle Marc wanted to make the earth a better place. Uncle Marc knew that the stars could take care of themselves. So, again, interesting. She, uses these words like demonic and whatnot, which I always associate with Christianity. But then she says, how Marc, hated sin more than any Christian minister. And he starts off here doing a sort of Christian, what do you call it? Sermon. But it sounds like he doesn't wind up there. Like that might be the gateway towards him finding another way to see the world outside of Christianity, but definitely not being a part of Earthseed. So, I'm super interested to see where this goes and what happens with Marcus. She makes this breakfast for him, and he's, she's telling him who Bankole is, the fact that she's pregnant, this whole thing. And he is asking her what happened to her, and she just gives him the short version and she admits that she was never a slave, that there have been people in the community who were slaves and escaped, but nobody has actually worn one of these collars. He is the only one who has experienced that. And that in particular to me is the crux of why he is so much more unwilling to accept probably what it is that Olamina is putting down. And I can deeply understand that. I mean, not really understand. I can imagine. Because that's the thing about those collars that I find so frightening. These collars cause you, especially, I don't think he mentions that they have the ability to make him feel good as well, because those were the ones that are still kind of new. But the fact that these collars can cause you to want to do anything to stop pain from happening, that is a kind of breaking of someone's spirit and will that removes who they are and causes them to become less than a human being because they cannot have any will of their own in any way. And if you lose that, what do you have? You can get it back, but that's what he's sort of trying to do to an extreme. I think that his reaction to getting it back and becoming a zealot, it makes sense that he would maybe overcompensate on trying to get his own will back by trying to feel like he has control over the workings of the world at large, which is just a fool's errand. Nobody does. I don't love Earthseed in terms of the overall ambition that Olamina has going on here, because I'm not sure how necessary it is. But in terms of the concept of worshiping change, I do feel like that's probably a recipe for the most contentment out of a lot of religions. You're not aspiring to anything specific. You are simply aspiring to roll with the punches and be like flexible and remain open and aware to the idea that what you have now may not be what you have tomorrow. And of course, that's just like a theoretical. It's one thing to believe in something, and it's another thing to really believe in it and be able to put it into practice, you know, when the time comes and shit starts to go down. So I'm not trying to say that this religion is just a cure-all that causes you to suddenly become so zen and one with the universe. But I do think that as a belief system, it probably gives people more comfort than a lot of others in this time, because it's hard when things start to go wrong in your life and you've believed in a God that loves and cares about you. It's really hard to reconcile still believing in that God and watching them allow horrible things to happen around you. So if you believe in a God that doesn't particularly care about you specifically, but simply is a force, and you have to do what you can with that force, that gives you a kind of power. And I could see that being really helpful, you know? So he tells the story about, well, first of all, there's this whole thing with Bencole and Halstead. Halstead is this like beach community, and she talks about how a lot of the houses were built on this palisade overlooking the ocean, and how, you know, in her opinion, building houses on the edge of a cliff like that is just fucking idiotic. But as anybody who has grown up near the shore knows, that is precisely where the most expensive houses are. This is the kind of thing that it is idiotic to do. But that's why the rich can do it. The rich don't have to worry about longevity because they have money to replace things if it goes wrong. You know, so it's a real, it's a moment of her just being like, this is really impractical and stupid. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Hence the people who did it, because they don't need to worry about practicality. However, the exception to my theorem there is the fact that even now, as climate change is happening in this story, and there are people like starving to death everywhere and homeless everywhere, these idiots are still living in those houses, and they wind up getting broken off and swept away sometimes. Now, whenever we have heavy rains, when there's an earthquake, or when the level of the sea rises enough to saturate more land, great blocks of the palisades drop into the sea, and the houses sitting on them break apart and fall. Sometimes half a house falls into the sea. Sometimes it's several houses. Last night it was 3 of them. The people of Halstead were still fishing victims out of the sea. Worse, the community doctor had been delivering a baby in one of the lost houses. That's why the community was turning to Bencole for help. Bencole had been on good terms with their doctor. The people of Halstead trusted Bencole because their doctor had trusted him. So Bencole is yelling because they send a couple of messengers from Halstead to come and see him, and he's packing his bags to go. And he's basically just like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? You have seen this happen 1,000,000 times. Why are you still living in these fucking homes? And one of the dudes is like, listen, most of us have moved out, but we can't make people leave their homes. Like, we tell people, we warn them, they do know the risks, but what can we do? And he leaves, and while he's gone, he winds up getting an offer to move there. And this leads to a pretty big confrontation between him and Olamina, in which I assume he eventually caves and stays. But it could have been that he left without her. And as much as I would have despised him for that, there would have been a part of me that understood. It's just really hard to know that Bencole does not believe in Olamina's overall vision, and that it's hard to know that he doesn't, and it's hard to know that she is fully aware that he doesn't. There's something about having that kind of belief and faith and desire to do something, and your closest partner in your life really not getting it, that sounds incredibly lonely to me. You know, I was married to somebody who did not understand me, not really, did not have a lot of faith in me, and was just kind of like, it felt a lot of the time living on another planet. And it is one of the most difficult to pinpoint hurts that you can experience when you try to like connect with this person and get them to see what you see, and they just don't seem capable of doing it. And I feel for both of them in this case, because he also feels the way that she probably does, in that what he visualizes is just being able to have a normal, uneventful life of simply raising a family and being healthy and managing to make it. And she wants a lot more than that. And he is just like, kind of, it's a combination, I think, of him being like, as she puts it, we aren't important people and only important people do those things. But also I think there's an element of like him seeing what she wants as almost being greedy. You know, we have the opportunity to have more than anybody has. Stability in a real home, in a place that still has electricity, indoor plumbing, all of that. And yet you are willing to throw it away for this hypothetical grand scheme. And I can understand seeing her as being kind of just ungrateful. And I see both their perspectives. So when Bankole leaves, Marcus says something like, so he really is a doctor. And I found this very interesting. I found it interesting that he reacts this way, and I found her reaction to him asking interesting. Because Olamina turns around. I paused and looked at him. Yes, and he and I are really married, I said, and I'm really pregnant. Did you think we were telling you lies? No, I don't know. He paused. You can't change everything in your life all at once. You just can't. You can, I said. We both have. It hurts. It's terrible, but you can do it. And it's funny to me that she reacted with like, did you think we were telling you lies? In a way that's almost like, it's more than just defensive. It's a little bit confrontational. Like, what the fuck does that mean? But honestly, after what Marcus has been through, him doubting what she says doesn't surprise me at all. Like, I'm sure that he has been told lots of pretty things that it turned out weren't quite what they sounded like. So I was immediately forgiving of him, kind of pressing her on this. And it surprised me how defensive she got and how little she seemed to understand where he was coming from. So he explains to her what happened that night. He got shot. He describes like seeing the other people die. His mother, whom he says his mother like didn't love any of us the way she loved his like shithead other brother who wound up like going bad and getting killed. And she kind of tries to be like, it wasn't that bad. And he's like, it really was. She did not love us the way that she loved him, even remotely. And you already got like, you know, you were sort of sheltered from this because you weren't her actual daughter. But trust me, being one of her actual blood children, like that, we felt that shit and we knew that she did not love us the same way. No question, which I just found really sad and it made sense. So these guys, like it's interesting. There's a way in which he tells both this story and a piece of the story later. These guys that came and raided the neighborhood are shooting at his brother, and the like bullet sort of ricochets and hits the guy that shot it. And they sort of almost take it as if these people were the ones responsible for his death. Like they were fought back when in fact it was just an accident. And so in retribution, they wind up, first of all, they rape Marcus, and then they also throw him into the fire. And he very, very nearly burns to death. He manages to just about pull himself out of there, but he survives, and this family picks him up. And it's a couple, a pair of scavengers picking over the bones of our neighborhood. They were a middle-aged couple named Duran, believe it or not. Maybe they were distant relatives or something. It's a pretty common name, though. But yeah, Duran was her stepmother's maiden name. So he says that they had an 11-year-old daughter that was kidnapped, and that they said that she looked so much like him that it just sort of captured the woman's imagination, and they decided to take him in. And she just devotes herself to trying to heal Marcus, who is on the edge of death for a while. And her husband seems to think that it's kind of a lost cause, but he allows her to just invest herself in this because he knows that it means a lot to her. And she says, let's see. Oh yeah, right. So he says, that the Durans, they were part of this neighborhood, that it was a neighborhood of squatters. It wasn't like the kind of protected neighborhood that he had grown up in, but that he begins to sort of become established as a leader figure in this community. And eventually there is some legislation that gets written into place, where they are going to be driving out the homeless. And this is really like, yeah. That meant we were part of the trash that the new mayor, the city council, and the business community wanted to sweep out. It seemed to them that all the trouble of the past few years was our fault. Poor people's fault, I mean. Homeless people's fault. Squatters' fault. So they sent an army of cops to drive out everyone who couldn't prove they had a right to be where they were. You had to have rent receipts, a deed, utility receipts, something. At first, there was a hell of a business in fake paper. I wrote some of it myself. In the end, it was all for nothing. Between them, the city and the county owned most of the rotting buildings, and the cops knew we didn't belong there no matter what papers we had. They drove us all out. Poor squatters, drug dealers, junkies, crazies, gangs, whores, you name it. So he says, when I was well enough, I had worked for them. I would clean and repair things. In spite of all our efforts, there was no way we could afford to rent even a shabby little apartment or house. We lived on Valley Street because we couldn't do any better. With all that, though, it probably wasn't as bad as you think. People looked out for one another there. And we would meet for church in this carport, and I would preach. And he says, I liked it. I prayed with them, helped them any way I could. Their lives were so terrible, there wasn't much I could do. But I did what I could, and it was important to them that I had recovered from burns and gunshots. A lot of them had seen me back when I looked like vomit. They thought if I could recover from that, God must have something in mind for me. So eventually they get raided by the cops again. And the cops, they have this confrontation where one of the cops gets shot. And that is pretty much the end of civility. The cops had been just trying to drag people out, but once somebody opens fire on them, they just begin to kind of massacre everybody. They have full armor. They're in armored personnel carriers. And he says that the Durans, he started looking for them and he never found them. But he just assumes that they were dead because, he thinks that they would have also been looking for him, unless they assumed he was dead. Maybe they're still alive. And he says, I loved them, and I loved being Marcos Duran, the little preacher. People trusted me, respected me. It was a good life. Most of them were good people, just poor. They deserved so much better than they got. So he winds up hanging around there for a bit, not sure what to do. And there are a couple of families that are squatting in other overcrowded buildings that offer to sort of take him in because they know and respect him. And he's looking back at it, realizing that he should have probably taken them up on that. But he felt that because he had just turned 18 it was time for him to strike out on his own. And he had kept hearing about people going north and decided that that was what he was going to do. But he hits the road totally alone. So, of course, this goes a different way than it did for Benkole and Olamina. So this, he mentions at this point how surprised he is to find out that like Olamina has kind of become the preacher to this community, even though that's not what they call it. She says that they call her Shaper. And when she says Earthseed, he his eyes fly open and he says that he has heard of them and that there was some politician running for Senate who mentioned this devil worshipping cult. And she's like, first of all, eager to be like, first of all, no, that's not what we're like. But also she's like, I really do not like the fact that he has heard of us, which I'm like, yeah, girl, that shit's going to get out there. You can't, I just feel like she is really underestimating what can go wrong here. Really underestimating it. And they have a little bit of a tete-a-tete about whether Earthseed is real, and her explanation that she didn't make it up. She just assembled some facts that she knows to be true. And there's this moment a little bit later where he decides that he wants to, he tells her first of all about the life as a slave with this collar and how you just want to die. And there is apparently no way to just, if we try to find some other way to die, to kill ourselves, they can stop us. The guy with the control unit can play you the way Mama used to play her piano. You get so you'll do anything just to get him to let you alone for a few minutes. You walk past a corpse on the road and you wish to hell it was you. So, yeah, it was just like a horror show. And that some girl didn't join, she got captured. And she didn't understand how these collars worked. And she tried to kill him in his sleep. And they burned her alive. And he tells them about these safety measures built into the collars and the way that they work. He says, you can't run. Get a certain distance from the control unit and the collar chokes you. You pass out if you try. Touch the control unit and the collar chokes you. It won't work for you anyway. It's got a fingerprint lock. If the fingers trying to use it are wrong or dead, it chokes you and stays on choke until someone with the right living fingers turns it off, or until you die. When someone threatens a pimp, sometimes he'll make his oldest, least popular whores fight for him, shield him. The truth is, while they're wearing the collars, all his whores will fight for him no matter how much they hate him. They'll fight hard. They might not even care whether or not they get killed. And of course, if you try to cut, burn, or otherwise damage the collar, it chokes you. So yeah, these are just like a literal nightmare. And he finally talks to her. Well, first of all, he talks to Benkole, which I think is really revealing. He goes to Benkole before he ever talks to Olamina about this. And that could be because either he doesn't take her very seriously, or it could be because, he knows that she is not going to like this idea, and he kind of doesn't want to even bring it up to her. And yeah, I thought that this was he has this moment with her, where he finds out that they were offered a place in a real home in Halstead. And he says, why do you want to have a baby in this dump? Just think you could live in a real house in a real town. And Olamina has to really fight to keep her cool, because this is a place that she has built from nothing. And he is out here calling it a dump when they rescued him and gave him a place to live and be free. And he has no gratefulness about that at all. It doesn't seem, but I kind of feel like it's more like he resents them for the fact that they saved him, probably because this is obviously an ego thing. He later on wants to do this thing with the preaching, I think, because of ego. He wants to be important. And it turns out that he has been out here telling people that she's leaving, even though she made it very clear to him that she isn't. So that already getting under my skin, that he's out here spreading her business around and flat out lying. And for what? And then he does this like the what do you call it? Sermon. And she warns him, you know, we don't just do a sermon. You aren't going to be able to just stand up there and say your piece and sit down. We have interactive conversations. They're going to pick apart what you say and ask questions, and you might not like it. And he says that he can handle it, but she's kind of like, I don't think you can. And that's why I'm going to let you do it. And he does. And there's this whole section. And one of the guys that kind of comes at him the hardest is also kind of threatened by him because Marcus is extremely good looking. And he is with this girl that he sees looking at Marcus all the time. And he doesn't like it. However, the questions that they ask, they are very polite about it. And they are also really pretty like incisive with what they ask and the way that they do. And it's very clear in the way that Marcus replies that he has not read any of the material that she pointed out to him to understand Earthseed. So he is defending himself with statements that are flat out incorrect about the way they believe. And somebody finally just says, you don't even understand us well enough to criticize us, which I'm like, yeah, that's 100% true. And finally, they like sort of allow him to end the discussion because it seems pretty clear that they have sort of humiliated him and that wasn't their intention. It seems like as a group, everybody really wants to have the conversation, but they wind up bulldozing him so hard that it's a little bit like, yikes, okay, maybe pull back, guys. We dogpiled him a bit. And this is also coming up in his trying to participate in the tasks of running this community. He doesn't want to learn things. He wants to already know them and already be good at them. And there are a limited number of things he's interested in learning, and they are pretty key. So it says he all but ruined a pair of heavy-duty shears he was supposed to be sharpening. He tried to grind their almost square edges to thin, sharp blades, and Travis gave him the chewing out he deserved. If you don't know, ask, Travis had shouted. Nobody expects you to know everything. Just ask. But now, instead of feeling important and proud, he feels angry and embarrassed. I had to let him inflict those feelings on himself. I couldn't let him begin to divide Acorn. And more important, I couldn't let him begin to divide Earthseed. So yeah, that is, I said that this was including chapter 9. My bad. It's chapters 6, 7, and 8. I read up to 9, but yeah, I really I'm worried about her brother, and we'll see how this goes based on the way that her daughter's talking about him. So, but man, this kid, he really just needs to be willing to not be top dog for a minute. And it's kind of remarkable how he went from being a slave to having this attitude right away, but it kind of makes sense to overcompensate. So anyway, all right, I got to wrap. I'm over time, but thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again very much to Danique for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you all again very soon next week with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.